We don't have independent thinking politicians anymore. They sort of buy into the lobby groups, they buy into this extreme nonsense. They've abandoned all sense of common sense.
This is Common Sense Generation. Common Sense Generation. Hi guys, this is Common Sense Generation, and with me is Nicholas Richardson, lawyer and a TV presenter. Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you for inviting me. It's a great pleasure to be here.
Nicholas, you're a British man living in Eastern Europe, which is already an act of courage, or maybe common sense. Going to the topic of common sense, what is it in your experience, and is it a difference between British common sense and Polish common sense?
Well, I think the main difference is in Poland there still seems to be a fair degree of common sense which has been rapidly abandoned elsewhere in the United Kingdom and the United States. And I picked the United Kingdom and the United States because they are two countries with the most advanced democracies who should know better. I mean, generally in Poland, we can talk about the peripheries, but there is common sense. For example, my rubbish outside my house is normally taken on a Thursday. Last Thursday was a public holiday. So on the website of the rubbish company, it said, we're going to collect it on Saturday. The rubbish van turned up on Friday, and I just caught the chap. I said, but you're supposed to be coming tomorrow. He said, yes, we are coming tomorrow, but we've got a lot of work, so we're coming both days. Common sense. They looked at the amount of rubbish and they sent out the truck twice. Whereas in the UK, you fight to get your rubbish removed these days. So I think people here, and probably from the history and the recent history of Poland, there's a lot more skepticism about authority, and people can see when they're being told rubbish. So they behave in a more, or try to behave in a more pragmatic way. In the UK, we seem to have lost all sense of rational judgment. Common sense is immediately undermined by those who purport to have authority over us.
I do agree that the global pandemic and the COVID proved to so many of us that the government can be totally out of common sense and absolutely unpractical, especially when the government itself is scared and doesn't know what to do. So they're going to impose many laws. And as you mentioned, especially in the Eastern Europe, here and in Poland, we are sort of accustomed to the fact because we had governments which were from foreign regimes. So they were not always in favor of the citizens, or they tried to exploit them. But when your own government tries to exploit you in somehow, because sometimes they don't know the result of it, then at least here in this part of the world, you become suspicious and you think, maybe closing the parks is not the best idea, and I will enter the park or the wood, despite this ridiculous rule which is imposed everywhere.
Yes, I think COVID was the big turning point when governments sought to impose stupid rules. I mean, for example, if you flew during COVID, in the airport you were told when you were checking in to keep a metre apart. But when you get on, then from getting from the airport terminal to the airplane, you put on a bus and they cram you in. And then you sit very close to somebody. It's just stupid. It's not common sense. I think what's more frightening now, in fact, is the way this lack of common sense is being imposed. So, for example, just to take your COVID point, when COVID brought out, many people said, no, this has been a leak from a laboratory in Wuhan. And you were told you can't say that. And Facebook and other social media removed that message. And now, 4 years later, what are we told? Yes, it was a leak from a laboratory in Wuhan, but nobody's apologizing to anybody. Nobody who was closed down.
I agree, and those were lives, and certain decisions weren't that this lack of common sense actually affected lives of people, their businesses, but in most desperate way, patients in hospitals. For example, when you could not visit your dying mother because you could bring COVID.
Yes, well, the most egregious example of that was, of course, in the United Kingdom with these alleged parties in number 10 Downing Street, which happened at a time when, if you remember the funeral of Prince Philip, there was the Queen, who'd been living in a bubble anyway, so was in no danger to anybody, sitting alone in the chapel at Windsor, with only her family around her, but her family at the other side of the chapel, obeying the rules, which really there was no need for her to obey the rules, but she did, while the politicians who'd imposed these rules were having parties and couldn't care less, which cost Johnson his job, and rightly so. But an example of a complete lack of common sense.
Exactly. When then the reality is still there, even if we want to somehow jinx it or make it artificial by putting those rules. Apparently we do it because we feel, as human beings, because we feel more safe. We feel some certain that we are in those boundaries with the mask on, even when we are sitting alone in the car. We feel we did some obligations and duty, so we are protected.
Yeah, but again, the most stupid thing, which I think was in Poland for a while, you had to walk down the street wearing a mask. A mask in fresh air is completely pointless. These masks, of the paper masks they sold to everybody, were worn by folk in a hospital setting, surgeons and the like, to stop them infecting the patients if they sneezed all over them. The idea you could put one on the metro and save everybody from infection was just complete nonsense. But anybody who stood up and said, no, sorry, this is under the laws of physics. There were scientists who were saying, on the basis of the data, there was particularly a pair at Oxford University, who were saying a lot of this is just wrong. And yet they were closed down. I mean, the model which was used by the United Kingdom government, but run by Professor Neil Ferguson, was a model which was based on a 10-year-old model he'd devised for a flu epidemic, completely irrelevant. He got foot and mouth completely wrong when they had the foot and mouth outbreak in the UK. And yet the government go to him and listen to him. He's not even a doctor. He's a statistical biologist, so he doesn't actually deal with real things. He deals with maths and he gets it wrong. But this is why do governments listen to this sort of person? Why don't they take a whole view? And the SAGE advisory committee was made up of people of the same view. It's this groupthink. It sounds very Orwellian. It is very Orwellian. And it's not the case, well, you have this view, I have that view, we discuss it. It's, you have this view, you're that right. Therefore, my view is wrong. Therefore, not only is my view wrong, I'm not even allowed to express my view. And we see this closing down of the debate. And common sense is all about actually listening, because you might learn something from the other person.
So those rules and stupidity of pandemic, which happened, and now we want to ignore that it happened at all, even though a lot of damage was done. But it has, I would say, other faces, and all what we are facing right now in the Western world, at least was named in a way as a culture war.
Well, it is a culture war. It's a culture war actually against common sense. We have, even in the country over the border from where we're recording this piece, there's a war going on. There's a war going on because Russia invaded Ukraine. Why did Russia invade Ukraine? There are many reasons, but one of the main reasons is because President Putin thought he would get away with it. Why did he think he would get away with it? Because he thought the West was decadent and stupid. He thought we were more interested in pulling down statues of people from whom we can learn a lot and imposing transgender lavatories in every street corner, and thought we wouldn't have the will to defend ourselves. Now, amazingly, for once, we did actually get our act together. But having said that, common sense would dictate that the main function of any government is to protect its people, which means essentially you have defences which keep your people safe. Now, there's a war going on next door. Poland is rearming to a certain extent, although the new government seems determined to impose more cuts. Yet the rest of Europe is still behaving as if nothing had happened. So, for example, one weapon, the British Army's self-propelled 155mm guns. As I understand it, the entire stock has been sent to Ukraine. And I'm not aware that they're actually busy restocking for the British Army. I mean, it's unbelievably stupid and short-sighted. It's in a funny sort of way, it's like the 1930s. There's a bully, let's disarm ourselves in the face of the bully and hope he goes away. It's exactly the wrong reaction.
And but it's also universally accepted in the Western world. This is surprising, that things which seem to be, let's say, not that important for a person with a common sense, from a perspective of life. So as you mentioned, the first duty of a government is to protect their citizens. Without protected borders, nothing which happens inside has no rules, no pacts, no defending human rights, no defending the rights of minorities, sexual minorities, have any can have any reality if the borders go down.
Right, exactly. But you see a similar approach with all this, what I would call this green nonsense. In the UK now we have a new government, and the Secretary of State for the Environment, David Miliband, is a zealot, a green zealot. So he's now going to allow almost unlimited installation of these windmills on land, when really we have excellent wind offshore in the United Kingdom. Worse, there's now a trend, and there are a lot of big schemes to put solar panels on productive agricultural land. And we need food security. We need to grow our own food, or more of our own food. To which David Miliband's response is, oh, well, if we don't sort out the climate, there'll be no crops anyway. Completely and utterly short-sighted and stupid and irrelevant. It's just extraordinary. There are some tenant farmers in upland areas are losing their farms because big corporations, to satisfy their green credentials, are buying up farmland and planting trees on it because that gives them some sort of weird carbon offset. But my favourite example, and you can read about it because it's hilarious, is Drax Power Station in Yorkshire. Drax Power Station was built in the 60s on top of a coal field, and it was a coal-powered power station, obviously. Fantastic. Now, to satisfy some green wish, it burns wood pellets. The wood pellets come from Canada. So these wood pellets, and you can see, if you, near where my father lives, the railway line, several times a day there are these huge 40 or 50 wagon trains with wood pellets to Drax. Now, these are facts. One, the stuff which comes out of the chimneys at Drax, burning wood pellets, is actually worse than the coal. Two, the company, and the shareholders are very happy, is subsidised to the tune of several £100 million a year. For the wood pellets they burn, every tree worth of wood pellets they burn will take 100 years of tree growth to, you'll need 100 years worth of tree for each tree they burn. And in fact, these trees are not being replaced anyway, so this all qualifies under the green subsidy on the grounds that somebody in Canada eventually may plant some trees to replace these pellets. Absolute and utter madness.
And you need all of this, money, fuel for transportation, which also...
well, it's because it's subsidised by the taxpayer. So the shareholders are going home and good luck to them, they're getting all this subsidy. And it's just a complete want of common sense.
Well, it sounds like fiction books, but it's reality, and this is extremely scary. What you mentioned, as well as the fact that now with this green policy, it seems like in Europe they want to stop producing food.
Yeah, they want to stop producing everything. Motor car, close down the economy to give it to let's shift our motor manufacturing to China, a country which is well known for its love of the environment. Complete madness. In Warsaw, good example of lack of common sense. The mayor wants to impose a clean air zone in the centre of Warsaw. So from whenever it comes into effect, you won't be able to drive a car older than 20-something years into the centre of Warsaw.
Yes.
Complete nonsense. Because if I have a 20-year-old car and I keep it going for another 5 years, I'm making a much smaller environmental impact than if I go out, scrap my car, buy a new electric car with a battery with lots of dangerous chemicals in it, mine in unfortunate conditions, which is heavier than the car I'll be replacing. The laws of physics tell us, of course, we need more energy if something is heavier to overcome inertia. That's not taken into account. And people congratulate themselves, I'm driving an electric car. Where is the power coming from? And why it's particularly relevant in a country like Poland is, as you know, we're just at the end of the summer and lots of Poles like to drive to the seaside for their holidays. Perfectly fine. There is not an electric car on the market where we could get in fully charged in Warsaw and arrive at the nearest point on the seaside without having to recharge the batteries. Complete and utter madness.
This is madness. And at least half of the society, many societies in Western countries, are signing up for it. And as some form of, because it's a moral feeling that I'm doing the right thing.
Yes, well, this is it. And large companies get away with it because they have the resources to do it, and it's sort of virtue signaling. Oh, look how wonderful we are. But for the average man and woman in the street who are struggling to, make ends meet, feed their families, get them to school on time, keep their jobs, etc., 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 it is complete nonsense. It is imposing a cost on them. Like these celebrities who fly around the world on private jets, telling you and I, our one holiday a year where we go on a charter flight is somehow destroying the planet. Absolute and utter sanctimonious nonsense. And a lot of people see through this, but they're frightened. If you work for a large corporation these days, even in a relatively humble job, and you say the wrong thing, if you don't sort of get with the program, your career is made very difficult. Particularly we're seeing this in academia. You know, in universities, people who actually, as a result of common sense, say, but this is nonsense. Or in the spirit of inquiry, say, this is nonsense, find they've suddenly lost their jobs because the university administrations are so frightened of their students now. Some people get up a riot and off we go. Kathleen Stock is a good example. The professor who, with her gender studies, mainly made the point. Or J.K. Rowling, of course.
Yes.
J.K. Rowling, these little, technical term, these little, begins with S, ends in T.S., won't say it. Radcliffe, Emma, what's her name, who turned into millionaires by starring in these films. When it was the 25th anniversary of the Harry Potter first film, they didn't invite J.K. Rowling to the celebration because these little brats took against her because she'd said something common sense about transgender folk. I mean, unbelievable. Where's the common sense? And most people say, well, this is absolute nonsense. But unfortunately, the large corporations have bought into this. Unbelievable.
This is a lot of nonsense, and why also even Harry Potter sold, because there is a lot of common sense in the story.
Of course
it shows how, for example, Harry and his friends, those were breaking a lot of rules because they rules imposed by the school, but let's say by the government, in order to do some goods. And right now, on the other hand, we want to impose on us even more rules. If you'd like to be, if you like to fall and obey all those rules, which the perfect society shows you right now. So, of course, no gender, no telling and naming anyone. So you are neither male or female. You only walk because you cannot take any vehicle at all, maybe biking. That's the only thing. So, but picking up groceries is already very difficult for you. So suddenly you basically stop living, or your way of life is very, very limited.
It's like George Orwell's 1984.
And this affects, as a paradox, most of the working class, not the upper class, who gets their groceries picked up by other people very often, but the middle class and the working class, which at least the Labour Party or those very left movements are supposed to be in favor of.
But they're not in favor. You see, because they hate the working class, because they don't like them, because the working class have views which these people pretend to find offensive. So, and they're completely hypocritical about this, because they live in the English case, people of the left wing, they tend to live in big expensive houses in central London, which normal folk have no way in their lifetime of affording. They send their children to private schools, but any old rubbish school is good for your children. The whole thing is, and I think the worst example, of course, are the people who run these large social media companies. You know, they promote do what the hell you like, but their children aren't allowed to spend all their time on mobile telephones. They generally have stable marriages. They generally bring their children up in a normal, traditional way. So how come they're doing one thing for their families, but everybody else's family is fair game? I mean, the whole thing has got out of kilter. No common sense. And the politicians, because of the falling quality of the politicians, they have now themselves become, and Tony Blair's a good example, they've become enthralled to rich people. Tony Blair became Prime Minister and wanted to be a rich person, left Parliament and became so much wealthier so quickly, it's almost unbelievable. And this is the problem. We don't have independent thinking politicians anymore. They sort of buy into the lobby groups, they buy into this extreme nonsense. They've abandoned all sense of common sense. And this is the problem.
Just wrap up this episode, because we criticize so much, but on the other hand, I think I do at least do it, and in this conversation with you, to point out that people, and even people who are just ordinary people, they have a lot of knowledge and because practice of life.
Yes, I think people do have innate common sense, and I think the pendulum may swing back. I think there's been enough rubbish and enough nonsense spoken that people are getting very angry about it. And we saw, in a funny sort of way, the recent rioting in England.
And we'll talk more about it later, but this was Nicholas Richardson on Common Sense Generation talking about common sense. And I thank you for watching our show, and I also thank Polish National Foundation for making this video podcast possible. This is Common Sense Generation.